Many people play Settlers with just the original tiles, but if you want to take your game to the next level and add a little interest to the game, you can do this easily, and you don't even need a 3D printer. Just a little foam from the hardware store and you can make a lovely little tile like this. I think I spent about $10 on a giant piece of foam of 8 foot by 4 foot, another couple bucks on paint, and I got some really great results with plenty of extra foam for future projects. If you want to make a farming tile like this for Settlers or another game, watch on. So first thing I do is cut out some hexagons from the foam. I got this template from Black Magic Craft. I'll leave a link below in the description. It's free. I used the hexagon that's just a little bit bigger than the Settlers hexagons, so it won't fit quite with their tiles, but that's okay. Then I just took a straight edge using a carpenter square and I cut a straight line so that I have two parallel lines the right thickness apart for my hexagons. The key to cutting foam with just a knife is to just take shallow passes. It takes about 3 passes to cut all the way through a 1/2 inch foam, which is what I have. You just gotta be careful to keep your knife perpendicular to the foam so that you get a nice square cut. So then you just slide that along all the way down and cut out a nice long strip. I'm not cutting all the way through here. I'm just kind of giving an idea for how I did it. And then after I did that, I made the horizontal cuts. Again, I used my carpenter square to get these cuts nice and straight. I'm just basically making an X to cut out the hexagons, and that way the lines double up for 2 hexagons. I did not make a perfectly tessellating pattern because that just takes a lot more precision and effort to get the nice hexagons out. So I just kept going down. We make my 2 hexagons, and that's enough to cut out that first hexagon now. There are a couple triangles of waste between each hexagon, so gotta come up with a new project to use those for. Yeah, and that's about all there is to it. Just take your time and make nice slow cuts. So once we have our tile cut out, we're going to want to waterproof it to protect it. So we're going to use a mixture of Mod Podge and paint. I just mixed in a little bit of black paint, so it's just grayish. And it makes a nice little bit of a base coat. So we're just going to paint that on with a old brush, nothing fancy. Yeah. So I made one up yesterday, so you can see there's these lines in the tile. Those are okay. They'll be covered up by the base coat of paint, so no need to worry about that. I just used a craft paint yellow for the farm look, which is the classic color in Settlers. You don't need a lot of paint. I actually put too much out, and you can always add more. For the base coat, I used a little bit nicer brush. It doesn't leave as many lines like that older brush I used for the Mod Podge does. So after about 5 or 6 coats, the tile's pretty yellow. There's a little bit of the gray showing through, but that's not a problem. The flocking will cover that up. So we're going to cover the surface with PVA glue and then sprinkle flocking over it. So I made yellow flocking from sawdust and yellow paint. since the farm is more of a field, I wanted to use smaller pieces of flocking, so I used a mesh to filter out the big pieces. So I'm just gonna cover the tile with some PVA glue, nothing too fancy, just slap some glue on there, spread it around with a paintbrush to get a nice coat. A slightly thicker coat is better, but it's really not precise or anything. You just need enough to get some of that sawdust to stick on. Do try to get every little bit of the surface covered though. If a bit is not covered, as you'll see later, I did miss one of the corners. It will take a little bit more work to get that fixed. It's not a big deal. It just is a little bit more work later. So we're just gonna paint that around and try to get a relatively smooth coat, but it's really not. None of this is very precise. And then just wipe off any extra glue that's on the edges so that they won't form any bumps. And now we're just going to take some of this flocking and sprinkle it onto the tile. Yeah. I did have a little bit of green and brown flocking mixed in the cup. It wasn't entirely intentional, but I knew it was going to happen, and I was okay with it because that little bit of variation in color adds a little bit more character to the tile. So keep that in mind when you're making your flocking. It doesn't need to be perfect, and imperfections actually make it more realistic. So I can just shake off any extra flocking, and then I can actually use that extra to cover up the last little spots. And really, you can just stick them back in your bottle or store it in a bag. When you're done, there's nothing wrong with the extra that falls off. It's perfectly good to use later. I just did a slight little tap to tap off any extra, and I'm going to let this dry. Let the tiles dry. I'm going to add a nice little coat of thin PVA glue. So I'm just going to take some PVA glue, stick it in my paint palette, and then water it down a little bit. And then we're just going to paint that on. Again, not precise, just watered down version of PVA. And the reason we're watering it down is so that it doesn't take away from the texture that the flocking gave, and also so that it can nicely cover all of the flocking and help glue it down onto the tile. So we're just going to paint that on. The PVA glue is white right now, and it does make the tile look a little whitish, but that's okay. The glue will dry clear and not really affect the color of the tile. So here it is, nicely dried. If you want, you could call this done. You could stop here if you want, but I'm going to go on for a few more steps. I'm going to add a nice light brown wash. Super easy to make. It's just brown paint, water, and a little bit of dish soap. Just mix it up and good to go. So I'm just going to squirt that onto the tile here, and then we'll spread it around with a paintbrush to give it an even coat. The wash does look kind of dark here, but the wash will dry significantly lighter. So that's something to keep in mind when you're making the wash, to make it a little bit darker than you want the final tile to be. So gonna give that a few minutes to dry, and we'll move on. While I was waiting for that to dry, I did make a little silo out of a toothpick, and I wrapped some paper around that toothpick to give it a little bit more thickness, and glued the paper on with a little bit of glue, and we're gonna let that dry. And then I also cut a little bit of foam into a barn shape. You can see I started painting it red here, and I'll finish painting that up as well before the tile dries. now that the wash is dry, you can see there's this bright yellow spot where there is no flocking. The wash really highlights where the flocking did not go. So I'm going to take some brown paint and just kind of touch up that and help it to blend in with the rest of it. So I just dabbed on a little bit of brown paint with a fairly dry brush. I also dabbed the paint kind of throughout the tile to help that spot blend in a little bit better. So now that the tile's dry, I've finished up these silo and barn. I'm gonna stick a half of a toothpick into the barn so that I can attach it to the tile. Gotta be careful here not to use too long of a toothpick, or you'll have the same problem as I did. And when you push it into the tile, the toothpick will push through the top of the barn. So you gotta be careful and push the toothpick into the tile first, and then it's better to put the barn onto the toothpick afterward. But it's not a big deal if you mess this up, like I did. I just took a little snippers and cut the toothpick shorter, and then put the barn on and pushed the little bit of foam that the toothpick pushed off the top of the barn. I just kind of pushed that back in with my finger, and you can't really tell the difference. If you look closely, of course, you can see where the toothpick went through, but a little bit of paint and it hides pretty well. This is also why I made the silo on a toothpick, is so I can just easily poke it into the tile. So, good to go. I did not glue these pieces onto the tile, since this way I can pull them out. That way I can use them for other games if I don't want to have little buildings on there. Pull it out. There's a little bit of a hole, but it's not too noticeable. It's still very playable, especially for wargaming things. The tiny scale might be out of place. That way I can easily remove it. But it does add a nice little touch to games like Scythe and Settlers that don't really use scale models. So there we have it. This is a super easy, cheap way of making nice 3D tiles for farming. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. It really helps out YouTube channels. It shows YouTube that you like this video and all that stuff. Also, if you want to see more of my videos, please subscribe and turn on the notifications. Notifications will let you know when I have a new video out, and I really appreciate you coming by and watching. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day or night or whatever you're at. With that, I'll see you in the future. Bye.